Enemy rounds began striking closer to Maria's position as Taliban fighters on the western ridge repositioned to engage her truck directly. She found herself in an impossible situation. She needed to continue suppressing enemy positions in the kill zone to protect the remaining convoy vehicles. But doing so made her an increasingly attractive target. Vehicle 3. Sergeant Chin's voice was tight with concern. "You're taking effective fire. Move to the rally point immediately." Maria looked back at the kill zone, where 3 vehicles remained trapped. The 5th vehicle was beginning its movement, carrying wounded soldiers who needed immediate medical attention. The 6th vehicle contained ammunition that forward operating base Chapman desperately needed. The 7th and 8th vehicles formed the rear guard, protecting the entire convoy's withdrawal. "Negative," she replied, continuing to work the M249 across enemy positions. "Convoy still needs suppressive fire." A rocket-propelled grenade streaked past her position, missing the truck by less than 10 meters. The enemy was getting her range, and it was only a matter of time before they achieved a direct hit. But the 5th vehicle was now halfway through the danger area, and her suppressive fire was keeping enemy heavy weapons from engaging effectively. "Vehicle 5 clear," came the welcome report. 2 vehicles remained in the kill zone. Maria's ammunition drum was nearly empty again, and enemy fire was becoming increasingly accurate. Bullets sparked off the truck's armor plating, and she could hear fragments ricocheting inside the cargo area. "Martinez," she called to the wounded soldier, but received no response. Martinez had lost consciousness from blood loss and needed immediate medical attention. The convoy's medical personnel were in the trapped vehicles behind them. That's when Maria heard the sound she had been dreading, the distinctive whine of incoming mortars. The Taliban had brought indirect fire weapons into the fight, probably 82mm mortars positioned in the mountains above the valley. Mortar rounds could destroy her truck even if she remained in a protected position. "Incoming mortars," she shouted into her radio. "All vehicles take cover." The first mortar round impacted about 50 meters from her position, sending shrapnel whistling through the air. The second round was closer, maybe 30 meters. The enemy mortar crew was walking their rounds toward her truck, and she had nowhere to go. "Park," she shouted forward. "Start the engine. We may need to move fast." But even as she prepared for movement, Maria continued firing the M249. The 6th vehicle was beginning its movement through the kill zone, carrying the ammunition that could determine whether forward operating base Chapman could defend itself against future attacks. The 3rd mortar round impacted only 20 meters away. Shrapnel peppered the truck's armor, and Maria felt fragments strike her helmet and body armor. She was running out of time and ammunition simultaneously. "Last drum," she called out to anyone listening, loading her final 200 rounds into the M249. The enemy mortar crew had her range now. The 4th round would likely be a direct hit unless she moved immediately. But the 6th vehicle was only halfway through the danger area, and without suppressive fire, it would be destroyed by the heavy weapon team on the eastern ridge. Maria made her decision. She would continue suppressing enemy positions until the 6th vehicle cleared the kill zone, regardless of the mortar threat. The ammunition those soldiers carried could save hundreds of lives at forward operating base Chapman. Working the M249 with desperate intensity, she sent controlled bursts across both ridgelines while watching the 6th vehicle accelerate through the danger area. Enemy small arms fire decreased noticeably under her suppression, but the mortar rounds continued falling closer to her position. Vehicle 6 clear. 1 vehicle remained. The rear guard Humvee carrying 4 soldiers whose job was to protect the convoy's withdrawal. They were the most vulnerable because enemy fighters could mass their fire against a single target. The 4th mortar round impacted 15 meters from Maria's truck, close enough that the blast wave rocked the vehicle violently. Shrapnel shattered the remaining bulletproof glass and punctured the truck's fuel tank. Diesel fuel began pooling under the vehicle. "Rodriguez." Captain Morrison's voice was urgent. "Move immediately. That's a direct order." Maria looked at her ammunition counter. 50 rounds remaining. The rear guard vehicle was beginning its movement, but enemy fire was intensifying as Taliban fighters realized this was their last chance to achieve a significant victory. She made a final decision that would haunt and inspire military discussions for years to come. Instead of conserving her remaining ammunition, she fired it as rapidly as the M249 would cycle, sending a continuous stream of suppressive fire across every enemy position simultaneously. The machine gun hammered against her shoulder as she emptied the final ammunition drum in one sustained burst. Enemy fire from both ridgelines virtually stopped as Taliban fighters dove for cover under the intense suppression. The rearguard vehicle accelerated through the kill zone without taking a single effective shot. "Vehicle 7 clear," came the triumphant report. "All vehicles clear of the kill zone." Maria released the trigger of the now empty M249 and slumped back against the truck's armor plating. Her ears were ringing from the continuous gunfire, and she could smell diesel fuel leaking from the truck's punctured tank. But every vehicle in the convoy had made it through the ambush. "Vehicle 3. Captain Morrison's voice was much calmer now. "Proceed to rally point for casualty evacuation and vehicle recovery." Specialist Park started the damaged truck and began limping toward the rally point where the rest of the convoy was forming a defensive perimeter. The engine was running roughly, and Maria could see smoke trailing from the punctured fuel tank, but they were moving. As they cleared the immediate danger area, Maria finally allowed herself to think about what had just happened. She had disobeyed direct orders multiple times, abandoned her assigned position, and used a weapon she wasn't officially authorized to operate. But her actions had provided the suppressive fire that allowed all 8 convoy vehicles to escape the ambush. "Rodriguez," Sergeant Chin's voice came over the radio, and she braced herself for immediate disciplinary action. "Outstanding work. We'll discuss your methods later, but you kept this convoy together." At the rally point, medics immediately began treating wounded soldiers, including Corporal Martinez, who was evacuated by helicopter within 30 minutes. The convoy's medical supplies were redistributed to vehicles with intact fuel systems, and they continued toward forward operating base Chapman. Maria spent the remainder of the journey in the back of a different truck, reflecting on the day's events. She had proven that sometimes the right weapon for a mission wasn't the one officially assigned. The M249's rapid rate of fire and lighter ammunition had made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. More importantly, she had learned that effective leadership sometimes meant making difficult decisions under pressure, even when those decisions conflicted with existing orders. The 100 soldiers at Forward Operating Base Chapman would receive their critical supplies because someone had been willing to adapt to changing circumstances. 3 months later, Maria received the Bronze Star Medal for her actions during the convoy ambush. The citation specifically mentioned her initiative in changing weapons and positions to provide effective suppressive fire. Military training programs began studying the engagement as an example of adaptive leadership under fire. But for Maria, the real reward came in a letter from Forward Operating Base Chapman. The medical supplies she had helped deliver arrived just in time to treat casualties from a Taliban attack that occurred 2 days later. 15 wounded soldiers received life-saving treatment because the convoy had successfully completed its mission. The letter was signed by all 100 soldiers at the base, with a simple message: "Thank you for bringing us home. All vehicles, execute movement now." Captain Morrison's command crackled through every radio in the convoy. Maria increased her rate of fire with the M249, sending continuous streams of 5.56 mm rounds across both ridgelines as the convoy began moving forward. The lead vehicles accelerated toward the cleared roadblock while she provided covering fire. Enemy fighters tried to intensify their attack during the movement, but her suppressive fire kept them from achieving effective aimed shots. The first 2 vehicles made it through the cleared boulder position without taking serious damage, but as the 3rd vehicle approached, Maria noticed increased enemy activity on the eastern ridge. A group of Taliban fighters were positioning what appeared to be a recoilless rifle, a weapon capable of destroying an entire truck with a single shot. "Contact east," she shouted into her radio. "Heavy weapon team positioning on the ridge." Maria shifted the M249 toward the new threat, walking her fire across the enemy position. The high rate of fire forced the weapon team to take cover, but she could see they were determined to get their shot. As soon as her fire moved to another target, they would resume positioning their weapon. This was exactly the scenario she had worried about during mission planning. With multiple enemy positions requiring suppression, she needed every advantage the M249 could provide. The weapon's rapid rate of fire and manageable 5.56mm ammunition allowed her to maintain continuous pressure across a wide area. Specialist Park's voice came through the intercom. "Staff Sergeant, we're next to move." Maria could see that her truck would have to pass directly below the enemy heavy weapon position. If that recoilless rifle fired during their movement, the entire truck and its critical medical supplies would be destroyed. "Park," she called back. "When I tell you to move, floor it. Don't slow down for anything." She concentrated her fire on the enemy weapon team, sending burst after burst toward their position. The M249 was performing flawlessly, but her ammunition was running dangerously low. She had less than 100 rounds remaining, and there were still 4 vehicles that needed to clear the kill zone. "Vehicle 3, move now," came the order. "Go, Park," Maria shouted. The truck lurched forward as Park accelerated toward the cleared roadblock. Maria continued firing at the heavy weapon team, keeping them suppressed during the critical seconds when her vehicle was most vulnerable. Enemy small arms fire cracked around them, but the truck's armor held against the rifle rounds. As they passed through the danger area, Maria saw the enemy weapon team making one final attempt to engage. She shifted her aim and sent her last 30 rounds directly at their position. The burst forced them to dive for cover just as they were preparing to fire their weapon. "Clear," Park announced as they moved beyond the effective range of most enemy weapons. But Maria's relief was short-lived. Looking back, she could see that the remaining vehicles were still trapped in the kill zone, and she was now out of ammunition for the M249. The convoy's heaviest suppressive weapon was effectively silenced at the worst possible moment. "Vehicle 4, what's your ammunition status?" Sergeant Chin's voice came over the radio. "Winchester," Maria replied, using the military term for being out of ammunition. "I need resupply immediately." She looked around desperately for additional ammunition, but found only 7.62mm rounds for the M240B, which wouldn't work in the M249. The wounded soldier Martinez was unconscious now, having lost blood from her shrapnel wounds. Maria was alone in the back of the truck with an empty weapon while her fellow soldiers remained under fire. That's when she noticed something that would change everything. In a storage compartment under the truck's bench seat, she found 2 additional M249 ammunition drums that Martinez had apparently kept as emergency reserves. Each drum contained 200 rounds of 5.56mm ammunition. "Park," she called forward. "Stop the truck." "What?" "Staff Sergeant, we're supposed to keep moving." "Stop now. I need to provide covering fire for the remaining vehicles." Park reluctantly brought the truck to a halt about 400 meters beyond the kill zone. Maria quickly loaded one of the ammunition drums into the M249 and tested the weapon's function. Everything operated smoothly. From this position, she had excellent fields of fire back into the ambush area where the remaining 4 vehicles were still trapped. The distance was at the edge of the M249's effective range, but it was manageable for suppressive fire. "Overwatch, this is Vehicle 3, she reported. "I have re-established suppressive fire capability. Proceeding to support convoy movement." "Negative, Vehicle 3. Captain Morrison responded immediately. "Continue movement to the rally point. Do not engage from that distance." Maria faced a crucial decision. Following orders meant continuing to the rally point and leaving her fellow soldiers without heavy suppressive fire support. Disobeying orders meant potentially saving lives, but certainly facing disciplinary action later. She chose to disobey. Opening fire with the M249 from her new position, Maria began systematically suppressing enemy positions along both ridgelines. The longer range meant her fire was less accurate than before, but it was still effective at keeping enemy fighters from maintaining aimed fire at the trap convoy. "Outstanding suppression," came an excited voice over the radio. "Enemy fire is decreasing significantly." Maria worked methodically across the enemy positions, using controlled bursts to conserve ammunition while maintaining continuous pressure. The M249's rapid rate of fire allowed her to cover multiple positions quickly, then return to suppress any position that tried to resume firing. The fourth vehicle began its movement through the kill zone. Maria concentrated her fire on the eastern ridge where the heavy weapon team was still attempting to position their recoilless rifle. Her suppressive fire kept them from achieving a stable firing position as the supply truck accelerated through the danger area. Vehicle 4 clear, came the report. 3 vehicles remained in the kill zone, including the rear guard vehicles that were most vulnerable to enemy fire. Maria reloaded her second ammunition drum and prepared to continue suppressive fire for the remaining convoy movement. But, as she resumed firing, she noticed something alarming. Enemy fighters on the western ridge were moving to new positions that would allow them to engage her truck directly. Her decision to stop and provide covering fire had made her vehicle a priority target for enemy forces. "Park," she called forward urgently. "We've got enemy movement toward our position. Be ready to move fast when I tell you." The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex. Maria needed to continue suppressing enemy positions in the kill zone to protect the remaining convoy vehicles, but doing so exposed her own position to increasingly accurate enemy fire. Bullets began impacting around her truck as enemy fighters adjusted their positions to engage her. The M249 continued to perform flawlessly, but Maria realized she was now fighting a battle on 2 fronts while running low on ammunition again. The ambush erupted with devastating intensity. Enemy fire poured down from both ridges simultaneously, creating a deadly crossfire that trapped the convoy in the narrow valley. Maria worked the M240B methodically, sending bursts of fire toward the eastern ridge where she had first spotted the enemy fighters. "RPG incoming," someone shouted over the radio. The rocket-propelled grenade struck the road between the second and third vehicles, sending a shower of asphalt and shrapnel through the air. Maria felt fragments pepper the armored sides of her truck, but continued firing. The key to surviving an ambush was aggressive response and movement. "Vehicle 3, can you suppress the eastern ridge?" Sergeant Chin's voice came through her headset. "Working on it," Maria replied, but she was already experiencing the limitation she had worried about. The M240B was accurate and powerful, but it couldn't cover the wide area she needed to suppress effectively. Enemy fighters were spread across nearly 200 meters of ridgeline, and she could only engage one position at a time. As she shifted her fire to a new target, the previously suppressed position would resume shooting. It was like trying to put out multiple fires with a single bucket of water. She needed the higher rate of fire that an M249 could provide to keep multiple enemy positions suppressed simultaneously. "Overwatch, this is Vehicle 1. Came an urgent transmission. We've got casualties up here. Need medical evacuation immediately." Maria's heart sank. The convoy carried medical personnel returning to forward operating base Chapman, but they were trapped in the kill zone, just like everyone else. Getting casualties out would require breaking through the ambush or finding a way to suppress it long enough for helicopter evacuation. Another RPG streaked down from the western ridge, this one aimed directly at Maria's vehicle. Specialist Park saw it coming and yanked the steering wheel hard to the right. The truck lurched toward the eastern side of the road just as the rocket detonated where they had been seconds before. "Good driving, Park," Maria shouted, then immediately returned to her weapon. The enemy fire was becoming more accurate as the fighters adjusted their aim. Bullets sparked off the truck's armor plating and shattered the bulletproof glass of the cab. Maria could hear Park breathing heavily through the intercom system, but he was maintaining his position behind the wheel. "All vehicles," Captain Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "We need to break out of this kill zone. Prepare to move on my command." But Maria could see the tactical problem clearly. The boulder was still blocking the road ahead, and enemy fire from both ridges was too intense to allow soldiers to dismount and move it. They were stuck in the worst possible position, taking fire from elevated enemy positions with limited cover and no room to maneuver. That's when she made a decision that would later be debated in military academies and after-action reports. "Sergeant Chun," she called over the squad frequency. "I'm dismounting to get better weapon positioning." "Negative," Chun responded immediately. "Stay in your vehicle." But Maria was already moving. She had spotted a large boulder formation about 30 meters from her truck that would provide better cover and firing angles. More importantly, She had seen an M249 squad automatic weapon in the back of the vehicle behind her. The gunner there had been wounded in the initial volley. She grabbed her M4 rifle and sprinted from her truck toward the wounded soldier's vehicle. Enemy rounds cracked through the air around her, but she reached cover behind the supply truck. The wounded gunner was Corporal Lisa Martinez, a friend from basic training. "Martinez," Maria called out. "How bad are you hit?" "Shrapnel in my shoulder," Martinez replied through gritted teeth. "Can't operate the 249. Maria looked at the M249 squad automatic weapon mounted in Martinez's position. This was the weapon she had wanted from the beginning. It fired 5.56 millimeters ammunition at 800 rounds per minute, perfect for suppressing multiple enemy positions simultaneously. "I'm taking over your position," Maria told Martinez. "Get down and stay covered." "Rodriguez." Sergeant Chin's angry voice came over her radio. "Get back to your assigned vehicle immediately." Maria ignored the order and climbed into the back of Martinez's truck. The M249 was properly mounted and had plenty of ammunition. She quickly familiarized herself with the weapon's condition and began engaging targets on both ridges. The difference was immediately apparent. The M249's higher rate of fire allowed her to sweep across multiple enemy positions rapidly, keeping them suppressed while she shifted between targets. When fighters on the eastern ridge tried to aim their RPGs, she could quickly put suppressive fire on their position, then immediately shift to suppress enemy machine gun positions on the western ridge. "Vehicle 4, what's your status?" came Captain Morrison's voice. "Rodriguez has taken over the gun position," Martinez replied. "She's got better suppression on both ridges." For the first time since the ambush began, the enemy fire started to decrease noticeably. Maria was able to keep multiple positions suppressed simultaneously, preventing the coordinated fire that had been so deadly minutes before. "Outstanding work, Vehicle 4, Captain Morrison acknowledged. "Continue suppression. Engineers are moving up to clear the roadblock." Two combat engineers from the lead vehicle had dismounted and were working to attach explosives to the boulder blocking the road. Maria provided covering fire as they worked, keeping enemy heads down on both ridges. The M249 was performing exactly as she had hoped, laying down a continuous stream of fire that made it dangerous for enemy fighters to expose themselves. But the ammunition was running low faster than she had anticipated. The higher rate of fire that made the M249 so effective also meant she was burning through ammunition quickly. She had started with 800 rounds and was already down to less than 200. "Martinez," she called to the wounded soldier. "Where's your extra ammo?" "Under the seat," Martinez replied. "But, Rodriguez, you're taking a hell of a risk here." Chun is furious. Maria found the additional ammunition and began reloading while maintaining suppressive fire. She knew she was in trouble for abandoning her assigned position, but the tactical situation had demanded quick decision-making. Sometimes following orders exactly wasn't the same as completing the mission successfully. The combat engineers had successfully attached their charges to the boulder and were taking cover for detonation. Maria increased her rate of fire to keep enemy heads down during the vulnerable period when the engineers were exposed. "Fire in the hole," came the warning over the radio. The explosion was tremendous, echoing off the valley walls like thunder. When the smoke cleared, the road was passable again. But Maria knew that moving the convoy through the kill zone would be the most dangerous part of the entire operation. "All vehicles," Captain Morrison announced. "Prepare to move. We're going to punch through fast and hard." Maria checked her ammunition count one more time. She had enough for sustained covering fire during the convoy's movement, but it would be close. The next few minutes would determine whether they escaped the ambush or became casualties themselves. Dawn came too early, but Maria was already awake when the wake-up call sounded at 0500 hours. She had been lying in her bunk for the past hour, listening to the subtle sounds of the base coming to life. Kitchen staff preparing breakfast, mechanics running final checks on vehicles, and the distant hum of generators that never stopped running. The dining facility was crowded with soldiers grabbing quick meals before their various missions. Maria sat with her squad, but conversation was minimal. Everyone understood the stakes of today's convoy run. The soldiers at Forward Operating Base Chapman had been without resupply for almost a week, and their situation was becoming critical. Weather report looks good for now, Corporal Williams mentioned between bites of scrambled eggs. But those mountain clouds can roll in fast. Maria nodded, still thinking about the firepower issue that had kept her awake. She excused herself from breakfast early and walked back to the motor pool. The morning air was cool, providing temporary relief from the heat that would soon become oppressive. At the motor pool, she found Sergeant Chun conducting final inspections with the vehicle commanders. The convoy consisted of 8 vehicles, 2 up-armored Humvees in front, 4 supply trucks in the middle, and 2 more Humvees bringing up the rear. Maria's position was in the 3rd vehicle, a supply truck carrying medical supplies. Rodriguez, Sergeant Chun called her over. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday." Maria approached hopefully, wondering if he had reconsidered her request for different equipment. "The M240 stays," he continued, dashing her hopes. "But I'm giving you extra ammunition. If we run into trouble, your job is to keep those supply trucks moving. Don't get caught up in trying to win the firefight. Just suppress and move." "Understood, Sergeant," Maria replied, though she still felt uneasy about the weapon selection. The convoy formed up at 0700 hours sharp. Maria climbed into the back of her truck and checked her equipment one final time. The M240B was properly mounted and loaded. She had 800 rounds of 7.62 mm ammunition in boxes stacked beside her position. Her personal M4 rifle was within easy reach, along with extra magazines and grenades. The truck driver was Specialist Tommy Park, a quiet kid from Oregon who had been in country for only 3 months. This was his first major convoy operation, and Maria could see the nervousness in his movements. "Park," she called through the communication system. "Stay calm today. Keep your speed steady and follow the vehicle in front of you. If we take fire, don't stop unless I tell you to." "Copy that, Staff Sergeant," Park replied, his voice tight with tension. Captain Morrison's voice came over the radio at 0715 hours. "Convoy Alpha, this is Overwatch. We have clearance to move. Maintain 50-meter intervals and stay alert." The convoy rolled out through the main gate of the Forward Operating Base. Maria felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Behind her sat crates of medical supplies that could save lives, antibiotics that could prevent infections, and blood products that could keep wounded soldiers alive long enough to reach proper medical care. The first hour of travel passed without incident. They moved through relatively flat terrain, passing occasional villages where children waved at the convoy and adults watched with careful expressions. The Afghan countryside was beautiful in its harsh way, with mountains rising dramatically in the distance and ancient irrigation channels cutting geometric patterns across the landscape. "Overwatch, this is Vehicle 3, Maria spoke into her radio. "We're approaching the first checkpoint." "Copy, Vehicle 3. Afghan National Army has cleared the checkpoint. Proceed with caution." The checkpoint consisted of concrete barriers and a small building where Afghan soldiers inspected vehicles and checked identification. The process took 20 minutes, during which Maria scanned the surrounding hills through her binoculars. Everything appeared normal, but she had learned that normal could change to deadly in seconds. As they left the checkpoint and began climbing into the mountains, the terrain became more challenging. The road narrowed and began following a series of switchbacks that climbed steadily upward. On one side rose steep rocky slopes where enemy fighters could easily hide. On the other side, the ground dropped away into deep valleys. "This is where it gets interesting," Corporal Williams's voice came over the radio from the lead vehicle. Maria adjusted her position behind the M240B and began systematically scanning potential threat areas. The weapon felt solid and familiar in her hands, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were going to need more firepower than she had available. At 1030 hours, they reached the most dangerous section of the route. The road passed through a narrow valley called the Bowling Alley by American forces. It got its name because the steep sides made it impossible to maneuver off the road, creating perfect conditions for an ambush. "All vehicles," Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "We're entering the danger area. Maintain speed and stay alert for suspicious activity." Maria increased her vigilance, sweeping her sector continuously. The mountain slopes on both sides were covered with large rocks and sparse vegetation that could easily conceal enemy positions. The convoy was completely exposed here, with nowhere to go except forward or backward. Halfway through the valley, Maria spotted something that made her stomach tighten with alarm. About 300 meters ahead, a large boulder sat in the middle of the road. It hadn't been there during the route reconnaissance 2 days earlier. Overwatch, this is Vehicle 3, she called urgently. Possible roadblock ahead. Large boulder blocking the road. Copy, Vehicle 3. All vehicles halt. The convoy stopped while the lead vehicles investigated. Through her binoculars, Maria watched 2 soldiers approach the boulder carefully. They were checking for improvised explosive devices, a common Taliban tactic for stopping convoys. Overwatch, this is Vehicle 1, came the report. Boulder appears to be recently placed. No visible IED, but it's too heavy to move quickly. That's when Maria noticed the silence. The normal sounds of mountain life, birds, insects, even the wind, had completely stopped. In her experience, this meant either severe weather was approaching or predators were nearby. In Afghanistan, those predators often carried AK-47 rifles. Sergeant Chun, she called on the squad frequency. Something doesn't feel right. The valley's too quiet. I noticed that too, Chun responded. Keep your eyes open. The lead vehicles were positioning themselves to push the boulder off the road when Maria caught a glint of sunlight reflecting off metal on the ridgeline to the east. She swung her binoculars toward the flash and felt her blood turn cold. Approximately 15 enemy fighters were moving into positions along the eastern ridge. They carried automatic weapons and what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades. This was the beginning of a coordinated ambush. Contact east, Maria shouted into her radio. Multiple enemy personnel on the ridgeline. This is an ambush. Her warning came just as the first enemy rounds impacted around the convoy. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire echoed off the valley walls, followed immediately by the whoosh of an RPG launch. The rocket-propelled grenade struck the rocky slope near the lead vehicle, showering the convoy with stone fragments. All vehicles, return fire. Captain Morrison commanded. Fighting positions. Maria opened fire with the M249, sending streams of 7.62 mm rounds toward the enemy positions. The machine gun hammered against her shoulder as she worked to suppress the ambush. But, even as she fired, she could see more enemy fighters moving into positions along the western ridge as well. They were caught in a crossfire in the narrow valley. Exactly as she had feared, the summer heat in Afghanistan was brutal, but Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had learned to ignore discomfort long ago. She adjusted her equipment vest and checked her M4 rifle for the 3rd time that morning. Around her, the forward operating base buzzed with the usual pre-mission activity. Soldiers cleaned weapons, checked ammunition, and reviewed maps with the focused intensity that came from knowing lives depended on preparation. Maria had been assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division for 18 months, but this deployment felt different. The Taliban had increased their attacks on supply convoys traveling through the Khyber province, and intelligence reports suggested something big was brewing. What made this mission particularly challenging was the terrain. The mountain passes were narrow, winding through valleys where insurgents could easily set up ambush positions. The briefing room fell silent as Captain James Morrison entered. He was a fair commander, respected by his troops, but Maria could see the tension in his shoulders. The mission they were about to discuss was clearly weighing on him heavily. Listen up, everyone, Captain Morrison began, spreading a detailed map across the table. We have a critical supply run to Forward Operating Base Chapman. Medical supplies, ammunition, and food for 300 soldiers who have been cut off for 6 days. Maria studied the route marked in red ink across the map. It snaked through the mountains like a dangerous serpent, passing through areas known for insurgent activity. The convoy would include 8 vehicles, carrying not just supplies, but also civilian contractors and medical personnel returning to the base. The intelligence reports are concerning, the captain continued. We have confirmed Taliban positions along Highway 7, particularly near the village of Kamdesh. They know about our supply shortage and are planning to intercept. Sergeant First Class David Chun, the squad leader, raised his hand. What about air support, sir? Limited, Morrison replied grimly. The weather forecast shows heavy clouds moving in this afternoon. We might not have helicopter cover when we need it most. Maria felt her stomach tighten. Mountain warfare in Afghanistan was challenging under the best circumstances. Without air support, they would be vulnerable to coordinated attacks from elevated positions. The Taliban fighters knew these mountains like their own backyard, and they had proven time and again that they could disappear into the rocky terrain after launching devastating attacks. Rodriguez, Captain Morrison called her name, and she stood at attention. You'll be manning the gun on the third vehicle. Keep those supply trucks moving no matter what happens. Yes, sir, Maria responded. But she noticed something in the captain's expression. There was hesitation, as if he wanted to say more but held back. After the briefing, Maria walked to the motor pool where the convoy vehicles were being prepared. The mechanics were performing final checks on engines and armor plating. She climbed into the back of her assigned truck and examined the mounted M249 machine gun. It was a reliable weapon, but looking at the mountain terrain they would traverse, she felt a nagging doubt. Hey, Rodriguez, called out Corporal Jake Williams from the neighboring vehicle. You worried about this run? Maria considered the question carefully. Fear was natural, but panic was deadly. The route's dangerous, but we've handled worse. What she didn't say was that she had been studying the intelligence reports in detail. The Taliban had been using a new tactic in recent months, coordinating attacks from multiple positions simultaneously. They would block the road with improvised explosive devices, then attack from both sides of the valley with rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons. The M249 was accurate and reliable, but it fired 7.62 millimeters ammunition at a rate of 650 rounds per minute. For sustained defensive fire against multiple targets, it might not provide enough firepower. Maria had been thinking about the M249 squad automatic weapon, which could lay down suppressive fire at 800 rounds per minute with 5.56 millimeters ammunition that was lighter and more abundant. She approached Sergeant Chun during the equipment check. Sergeant, I'd like to request an M249 instead of the M240. Chun looked surprised. The 240 has more stopping power, Rodriguez. Why do you want to downgrade? It's not about stopping power, Maria explained. It's about volume of fire. If we get hit from multiple directions in those narrow valleys, I need to be able to suppress several enemy positions quickly. Sergeant Chin shook his head. The M249 is a squad weapon. You're providing vehicle support. Stick with what's assigned. Maria knew when to stop pushing, but the feeling of unease remained. She had been in enough firefights to trust her instincts, and something about this mission felt like it would require every advantage they could get. That evening, she sat in her bunk cleaning her personal sidearm and thinking about her family back in Texas. Her younger brother Miguel was graduating from high school next month, and she had promised to be there. Her mother worried constantly about her deployment, calling it that dangerous place because she couldn't bear to say Afghanistan out loud. The base's communications center allowed soldiers to make brief calls home, but Maria decided against it tonight. Hearing her mother's voice would only make her more homesick, and she needed to stay focused on tomorrow's mission. Instead, she walked to the base chapel, a small building constructed from shipping containers and sandbags. Chaplain Williams was usually available for soldiers who needed someone to talk to, regardless of their religious beliefs. Evening, Staff Sergeant. The chaplain greeted her warmly. How are you feeling about tomorrow? Honestly, sir, I'm concerned about our firepower, Maria admitted. The intelligence suggests we're walking into a complex ambush, but the command doesn't seem to share my assessment. Chaplain Williams nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes we have to trust our training and our teammates. But it's also important to trust your instincts. They've kept you alive this long. Maria left the chapel feeling slightly better, but the nagging worry remained. She had learned to read the signs of impending trouble, and everything about this mission screamed danger. The Taliban had been quiet for too long, which usually meant they were planning something significant. Back at the motor pool, she performed one final check of her equipment. Extra ammunition, medical supplies, communication equipment, and emergency rations. Everything was properly secured and ready for the morning departure. The base grew quiet as soldiers settled in for the night. Maria lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing different combat scenarios. She visualized the convoy route, imagining where attacks might come from and how she would respond. The M240B was a good weapon, but she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would demand something more. Outside, the Afghan night was clear and cold. Stars filled the sky in a way that never happened back home in the city. It was beautiful and peaceful, which made the coming danger feel even more surreal. In a few hours, they would be driving through some of the most dangerous territory in the world, carrying supplies that could save lives or become prizes for enemy fighters. Maria finally drifted off to sleep, but her dreams were filled with the sound of gunfire echoing through mountain valleys.